let's talk about constructors. So the problem with our class 1 implementation, the car class number 1 implementation, is that we couldn't access the make and the model and the year, or set up so that there's a value for each of these member variables. So to be able to set those variables, one of the ways, or the most common way, is when you create an object, you want to set up so that it has certain values, and that's where constructors come in. So as you can see here, there are two constructors, the car and then parentheses, and then a car, and then that can accept 3 different parameters that will set up the value for make, model, and year. This is not the only way. You can actually have constructors that can set up only the make and the model, or just the model and the car. You are the programmer, so you decide. But the way to let the compiler know this is the constructor, this is a constructor, is by using the class name as the name of the function. So what are constructors? It's a member function. It's default to be private, and that's why you see we need the public keyword. Also want to mention that by convention, we always have the constructors in the lined up in the first few functions of the class definition. So right after public, we expect that the constructor is going to be there. It will, and they are called automatically when an object is declared, for initializing the object. That's the purpose of a constructor. And the function name, like mentioned, is the name of the class car. So to implement a constructor, you would also use car : but because it's a constructor and the name of the constructor is the class name, and so you will see car : car. So this is called the default constructor, meaning that if an object of this type is created, it automatically, if there's no constructor being called specifically, then it would default to this one. And then the other constructor that we have defined is the one that will take in 3 parameters. And you can see when we set up the value for the private members, we don't need to use the dot to access it, because we are within the class itself. So we are doing our own thing, and so we can access the variables freely. So the default constructor, like I showed you previously, it just is going to initiate the variable year to 0. You can actually skip it if you want to, but I highly not recommend it. I actually thought about not even mentioning it, but actually the call to declare an object car, my car, it will actually work even if you don't have the default constructor written, because the compiler will automatically create one for you. However, for cases like this, nothing unexpected will happen. But if you are writing classes that has more variables and maybe even pointers, then you don't know what can happen, and therefore usually it's not recommended that we depend on the constructor the compiler actually provided. You want to write your own default constructor, which is the habit that we want you to have here. So to declare and initialize a car when a constructor exists, and we kind of try to really do it anyways. So this is the way to call a constructor. So you see my car, and then parentheses, and then the calling the second constructor that we have implemented, which will take in the make, the model, and the year. Another way to actually declare and initialize is we can call car my car, which we'll call default constructor first, and so it will set up the year becomes 0, and then later on we will call the constructor again by saying equal by the assignment operator, and then and treated the constructor like a function in this time. So I want to compare how the declare and initialization of class and struct are different. So you can see in struct we are just giving the value of the member variables in order of they are defined, right, in the struct. But in the class situation, you actually can change the order of this. It doesn't have to go with how it's presented in the class. So you can modify a whole object like you've seen. Later on, after you declare the object, you can use the assignment operator to assign it to another object of the same kind, or to call the constructor. So let's do a demo. So this is we changed it a little bit to include the two constructor. Like we mentioned, this is usually where we place the constructors. Is the first member functions that you will see. We use public because constructors are private also, like we mentioned before. Everything in a class are private by default. And so now we make them public, and that's why we can call my car.printCar. We can call your car equals to car and this constructor function. If public is not there, actually this will fail because these functions are not public to people outside of the class definition or class implementation. And like before, the constructor definition, the implementation is after the main function, and the declaration or the definition is before. Be reminded that just like the other member functions, we need the car : before the constructor. Print car stays the same. These two constructors are like what we had in the PowerPoint. So let's run the program. So we have defined my car, which is a Volkswagen Passat 2018, and then we print it out. So our print car function is working properly, and so it print out the car information properly. And then another object is created called your car. So we use the default operator, default constructor first, and then we call the constructor again using Ferrari F60 2014, and that's why it got printed out this way. Now I set up your car equals to my car, and so your car now actually I haven't compiled it because I changed it. So now you see your car is downgraded to equal to 2018 VW Passat. So to recap what we talked about constructors. We talk about how when an object is created, magically constructors are being called. If there's no indication without parentheses, basically when you create an object, then the default constructor will be called. If you have parameters, and it will go and see which constructor to use. And also want to remind you again, the constructor will have the name of the class name car, and so when you do implement a constructor, you would use class name : class name to start the function name, basically. So next we are going to talk about setters and getters. So how do we set up the value of the member variables and get them if they are private? See you soon.